Hiya and welcome to this week's episode of Inside Property Development, where I'm speaking with fantastic architect Cany Ash from Ash Sakula. Hello.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. So before we get started, I always like to ask people, where did it all begin? So how did you end up where you are now? What did you, in particular, what did you like doing when you were a kid? Where did you grow up? Things like that.
Well, I think it all came from my mum. She was brought up in Baltimore and then passed around various people all up and down the East Coast. A very determined character. Did theatre. That was her profession, but her big passion was actually moving, creating environments, moving boxes around a room, imagining things differently. So that was the way we ended up, going and exploring together. And it was kind of quite clear that was her project, and I was going to be an architect. And I just fell into role.
So where did you grow up then?
Islington.
Okay.
Yeah, not far from Tony Blair country.
Yeah.
Just between the Caledonian Road, if you know that, by King's Cross and Upper Street. And what I think is kind of funny now is like thinking that Caledonian Road was the posh bit and Upper Street was on its uppers, all the shops closed in the 70s.
Yeah.
There was, you see places change, don't you?
So even when you were a kid, you wanted to be an architect, did you?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So where did you study?
Cambridge for the first part, and then what's called the University of Westminster, just opposite Madame Tussauds.
Yeah.
For the masters.
Yeah, very good. And then who did you first work for? How did that sort of all progress?
I worked. I suppose it's interesting to think about what I actually did in my degree, because I was always a bit of an outsider. So instead of like living in college in Cambridge, we set up a squat, which was in an old burnt out pet shop, and we used fish tank, the sides of fish tanks to make the drawing boards, and built our own kitchen, which was an earth floor with a kind of stream running out the back door, which was full of maggots, and the cats who loved the fish and chip shop next door used to kind of like come in and out of our kitchen. It was all kind of grotty, but we just thought it was a palace because we designed it. We had the main kitchen worktop was hanging from the joists, and we had to kind of duck a bit and sit down in there. It wasn't very tall, but we had like a place where we could develop photographs in a kind of vault behind there with an old kind of Russian enlarger that came out of a suitcase. And so there's lots of parties, lots of music, lots of creativity in that place. And on the ground floor, there we had glass windows all round because it was a big shop front on the corner. And opposite, there were always these amazing cigarette ads with landscapes. So it felt somehow like you were there, but you were also in some incredible open terrain, some desert, some woodland. And I suppose the business of like making stuff feels to me like a human right. And when I sort of moved to London, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to kind of find a place where we could like make stuff, do stuff. And we found, this is me and a couple of mates from the architecture course, got involved with 6,000 square foot on the river in Wapping, and we had it free for a year. The only job we had to do was to double plasterboard all of these diagonal steels, and the ceiling and everything.
Was that sort of part of the deal?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
And I think the other two didn't take it too seriously, but I thought, but we've got to, we've all signed for it. So it was like hauling loads of plasterboard up, on dodgy ropes and doing all this building. But we had also good parties. You can imagine there were these gantries hanging out over the river, and we went all the way back to the roadside. And I don't know if you've seen those big warehouses, the Metropolitan.
Yeah.
It's called Metropolitan Wharf, so it's just huge by the Dickens pub, just there. And then you get a taste for, having a bit of a stake in your own environment. And I feel that meant when I was like cycling from there to Baker Street, which was my first job at working for some people who did lots of offices. I don't know if you would have ever come across them, called DEGW.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah. So that they made loads and loads of money in the 80s. All they did is say, you don't need to have typing pools and people sitting in little offices around the perimeter. You can have project spaces, people can collaborate. They brought all these ideas from the States. And so anyway, I was doing this commute on a bicycle, which was in those days really quite stressful because people would often roll down their windows and just randomly shout, "You cunt," like just for being on the road.
Yeah.
And I was cycling always slightly different routes. I came through this mews where I still live and I still work 42 years later.
Wow.
But there was signboards up for an auction, and there was this big London poster company that did all the billboards that had gone bust, and so you could only buy them. There was like 8 properties. You could only buy them in lots of 4. And so I just met this guy at DGW who'd been running the Mexico office, come back to London, and I dragged my mum in, who I've always said was quite a character and entrepreneur, and then a couple of other characters, and we went to the auction and bid on these properties and got them, and I was 22.
Wow.
And then we set up this company called Doughty Partners, because it was Doughty Mews, just by Doughty Street. And basically my master's was really, I based my case study on it. We learnt electrics, but just by borrowing books from the library. We did all the bricklaying, which was quite dodgy, but just learnt all the trades doing that. And it gives you a taste for playing with existing, what's now called the circular economy. We were like, strangely enough, we got these garage doors, which we still front our office, big old, heavy timber doors with great Collins hinges on them. And we actually found them round the corner. They were being ripped out of a house that belonged, a corner property that belonged to Diana Dawes. You sort of can't make it up, that the doors came from Diana Dawes. Her place was done up all by sort of BBC set designers. So even though it was just a mews, she had her kind of, French Renaissance rooms and her Chinese rooms, and, it was quite a fantasy place. But they wanted to put up an over doors there. So we got these doors, and about 6 of us carried each door around the corner and reused them. So that was like a gift from the neighbourhood, if you like.
Wow. Don't get things like that nowadays, really, do you? Unfortunately.
You get other stuff though.
Yeah.
There's another project, kind of fast forwarding actually to 2010, where they were gearing up for the Olympics, and there was this area near Excel, do you know, the big exhibition centre, where every 3 days, they have a big exhibition, and then they throw out all of this stuff out at the back, from it. But there was also all these projects going on at the time, and we won a competition called Meanwhile London, And so we were able to use these flows of materials, building a kind of shanty town, I suppose, opposite Canning Town tube station. There was a big site where they'd at first, when we entered the competition, was a guy called Clive Dutton. Did you ever come across him?
No, I don't think so.
Well, he'd come from Birmingham with some big ideas about, he'd done Big Birmingham, then he came and said there was this arc of opportunity going from Old Street all the way down into the Royal Docks, and this was his big thing. And he was looking at this two little 4-storey slab blocks and thinking, yeah, that could be one of the sites for Meanwhile London. This is quite a rant, isn't it? But anyway, there were 4 sites you could choose, but only one of them was for a 5-year period. And we thought, well, we're not messing around with a site that's going to be really hard to fund unless it's going to be a proper embedded thing with the community. So we won this site, and they decided...
This was like a design competition, was it?
A big design competition, yeah. And actually, we're giving the awards in MIPIM. And so, you know, Boris Johnson was there, this guy Clive Dutton, who's head of development in Newham. And they said, oh, by the way, those 2 buildings that you were going to use for your community hotel and art space, that's in Balfour Beatty's package to demolish. And so we had to give it to them. So, yeah, so you've got the site, we just haven't got the buildings. So we thought, well, what are we going to do? We haven't got anywhere. It's like being suddenly like rats out on an open site. And when we looked at it, they'd just taken it, hadn't taken really anything off site. They just like squashed these buildings. So you just had hardcore sprinkled on top. If you dug down at all, you had old window frames, wire, glass, whatever. But there was like about 10 of us, and we just thought, well, we're going to do something. How often do you get a bit of London to play with? So we negotiated a lease, and I said it was essential to be able to have open fires on it, which was, you know, but we didn't have water, we didn't have any electricity, we're completely off grid. And we built slowly over about 2 or 3 years a market, a big feasting table, an outdoor theatre called the Flying Carpet, a place which had about 100 square metres of covered space that was called Flitched. That came from the idea, it's a Victorian word where they put steel and timber together.
Yeah, flitch
beams. Yeah. So this was a whole idea about a magpie culture where you've got people throwing out, I mean, we just had to click our fingers and huge bulks that had been underneath cranes would be delivered. So we could dig down for the water, turn it on. We never got electricity, but we did get the water, and we did build proper toilets and things. And then we just cover the hole with these big bulks, and then we put the cafe on top. We got a little cafe van. And anyway, I think this came from my conviction that everybody's got the right to make stuff happen, to build, really, to make events happen. You know, not everybody can put 2 pieces of wood together. You have to know you need 3 screws and things. Some people want to learn that. Some people just want to set up shop. Some people want to have, get a weekend of bands together. But it's incredible. Once you have an open space like that and the opportunity, people just walking in and they're just starry-eyed. Wow, you mean I could just build some allotments here? I could just... And our rule on this site was whoever came onto site was king. And whatever they wanted to do, it was yes. Unless, of course, it was like... dangerous, yeah. So that sort of, in parallel to our architecture practice, these are the kinds of adventures we feel are really important. And every neighbourhood or part of the city or town should have these rougher spaces that we call third spaces. They're like, they're not home, they're not work, they're not, a school. They're a place which is not a community centre, because sometimes community centres are in their own right excluding people, because you think, oh, if it's the community, maybe I'm not part of the community, I'm only passing through, or I'm not the right this or that. Whilst this was kind of very different from that, it was, well, we called it radically open, meaning that it was just ill-defined. Anybody could define it for themselves. And just imagine if you had all the plots of land that are sitting for 5 years, not doing very much, just because they're waiting for funding, waiting for planning, part of the city churn. If all of those places could be harnessed for creativity, for people to just build stuff, I think, that would be a great, building on a kind of human right for people to do stuff intergenerationally, outdoors, not in a park where there are rules, but just in a space where it can change. They can have an imprint on what happens there.
And what do you think? Because that's great, and I agree with all of that, but I think it's got much harder to do things like that in recent years, hasn't it?
Why? You tell me, because you know more.
Well, I don't know more, because I don't really, probably not trying to do it as much as you have been, but rules and regulations and admin bullshit, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been around.
Not think it's got worse.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that there's this security by design that gets into any place that a local authority, because it was local authority land, just it was in the development plan to, with Bouygues, if you know Bouygues.
Yeah.
But any time that a local authority feel that they need to control something, it's because they've got to look after their insurance liabilities.
Well, that's what it's getting to, really.
So when we took this on, we had a proper lease, and we had to. It was quite onerous. It was quite a long thing.
Oh, it was?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we had to get planning permission, even though we didn't know what was going to be built there. We had to do flood risk assessments, all of the stuff that had already been done.
Yeah.
But
crazy,
so the botheration, honestly, that it was annoying, especially since the local authority didn't give us a penny for this whole thing.
Yeah.
So we raised, I don't know, sort of probably £70,000 or something from lots of different sources. But all of those funding applications, they need to be evidenced. You need to collect data. So no, it's not to be. I think that the lessons from that is that we need to make it easier.
I was just going to ask you, actually, because it's the same with. I mean, that is development. It's a different type of development to the stuff I usually talk about. But, one of the problems, I'm particularly into housing, as I know you are as well. One of the problems is really the red tape. What do you think can be done about that? Any ideas?
Well, I think as soon as it's recognised as a thing that you need for mental health, for physical, well-being in the city, that people can grow their own things, that they can cook together, then it can be linked to the preventative care that is going up the agenda now. It can be in terms of integrating different flows of people. It was amazing to see your Indian millionaire who landed there through working at Canary Wharf, talking to these alcoholics and having great conversations. There are not many places that can happen outside this this third space. So the amounts of money that are required and the provision in insurance terms, it's quite modest. It's very modest for what it delivers. And there's a lot of pent-up desire to make social enterprise work, to make... there's lots of different people who are interested in it for different reasons. And I think that is because when you're outdoors and you're outside the boundary of what is a sort of defines you in your identity in the city or a town, you can make it up, and it's that freedom to play act, to meet people in different settings. We had free mint tea on site at all times, and we had like 4 different types of mint. So there was like, in some ways, quite a sort of fancy menu of mint tea, but it didn't cost anything. And then we made a lot of the money on alcohol, to be honest. So we did have the, licensing people come round and check our hygiene. We made lots of chips.
Yeah.
And that.
So back to how you got started. So did you pretty much start your own practice very early on?
Yeah.
Okay. So you didn't really, because very often with lots of architects there seems to be a little bit of a, they work for a small practice and then a bigger practice and things like that. You didn't really do that.
Well, I worked for the GLC for 6 months, which was really an eye-opener into how planning works, how social housing estates get sort of maintained. I did courtyard improvements and also those small industrial estates. They were keen on building that at the time. But yeah, apart from that and DGW and a small amount of time being involved with DEGW, were doing, as I just mentioned, they were doing Kirkcaldy's experimental and testing works in Southwark Street, which is an incredible building that has a huge machine inside that tests cables, bridges. You can still go and see it. Then I just went off to Berlin and I worked for about 12 different practices, but only for competitions. So, on short stints. And then when I came back, me and Robert set up this practice in Soho, and then Rosebery Avenue, then Hatton Garden, then back in our house. So our studio is at the moment where the printing machines were for that big poster company I was telling you about.
So I know that you've done lots of interesting schemes. What are your tell me about some of your most interesting ones? Housing in particular.
Housing.
Yeah.
Oh, because I was going to carry on with this circular economy thing.
You can do. Go on, Em.
Okay. I think a big breakthrough for us,
because
we were working for different arts organisations. We did a big arts centre in Cardiff called Chapter Arts, which was in an old school, and we were like working on a budget there, but it was transformative. The big one for us was when, and the reason it's in my head is they've just celebrated 20 years, was when we got invited to an interview in Leicester, and there was an old bus depot which definitely was going to be demolished because the leader of the council said it was like a shame that it was there in Leicester because it was all white tiled. He said it was the public lavatory of Leicester, and we repurposed this building in a 12-week period from when we got this random call and went up for an interview till when it was on site.
Who was the call from?
Leicester City Council.
Oh, from the council, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I keep missing out bits. I'm really sorry. But this story was just so weird because in 12 weeks we were on site, and in that 12-week period we went to planning for this retrofit, but also for putting a new building next to it and doing this whole thing for the creative industries. So Leicester City buses became Leicester Creative Business, and the trick was we had to do all this consultation with local digital creatives, go to planning, get it, and also do all the tender package for the drawings. And it was this kind of agility that I loved. I loved the fact that we could, we had these meetings, the drawings that we did. I might just show you some of them because they were so, this was the old building that we overclad and this was a new one. And this was this timeline that I was talking about that was so fast. Sorry, my bracelets. I've got to see. But the drawings that we did, they were like this, very, very simple cartoons of like, don't waste a good building because it could be a Cubist masterpiece. Don't worry about the substation. We can make that into a glowing blob. Keep the roots going. You know, this kind of thing. About how you could link a new building, an old building, and how the routes that people made through the city could be changed with this building. And we can go through so much concrete to create an atrium in the old building. And created, 100 studios there. That was, the speed of it is not something normally we as architects get to experience because everything can get a little bit stymied and
But that was 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
A bit more.
Yeah.
But the client was the council.
Client was the council, yeah.
So obviously they wanted it to happen.
Yeah, they needed it to happen because otherwise the money was going to go to Nottingham.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
What can be done when people are incentivised to get their finger out?
This was the way that I met Chris Brown, who
Igloo.
ran Igloo.
Yeah.
So we got into our first proper housing thing through Chris coming round and seeing this building, thinking, oh, right, you did that for 2 million quid. Well, you're the kind of architects that we need. And we went on to win 2 developer competitions for them in Newcastle, which was a public-private partnership with Newcastle City Council. But then when they had these regional development agencies, and then they got rid of them, and this led to doing a master plan for the whole valley with Studio Grey West.
Yeah.
And then eventually we got a site which was for 74 homes, or 70 homes, and they just assumed we were going to do it as apartment buildings. But then we came back and said, no, we don't want to do that. We want to do own front door housing. So everybody has a front door, and we made back-to-back homes. We made homes on top of homes. We made triplexes over duplexes and single flats. It was a real toggle of different house shapes, but it got more homes on the site. And it created something where everybody got a view of the river, and the council loved it. People were queuing up to buy these homes. And okay, you're going to say it's a long time ago, it was a different era in terms of cost. I think the most expensive home, which was a 6-storey tower house, which was a wild house with a kind of generous...
So sorry, that wasn't a single house over 6 stories?
It was, yeah.
Wow.
And it went for £350,000. So you had these bedrooms on 4 levels, bedroom and bathroom on each level, and then a rooftop terrace. And then on the ground floor, there was this kind of flowing space with a garden all round overlooking the river. I just say that because at first Igloo was saying, oh, you can't do that. And then we were saying, but it really works. It makes the whole thing sculptural, and it's tough, and it's big enough for Newcastle. It's weird enough for the Eusebourne Valley, which is where it was. If you've ever been to Newcastle, there's 4 music pubs in the Ousburn Valley that basically are the backbone of in the indie music scene, and the place was so interesting, just underneath the Biker Wall. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
And I think what we felt proud about in the end is that we didn't flatten that culture. We were worthy of it. People thought, oh, this is perfect for Ousburn. They could see Ousburn in what we did. And now you've got a little bread shop where people queue up all around the houses to buy bread.
And that was effectively a joint venture with the local authority.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I'll tell you, one of the things, that sounds amazing. I'd love to see it, actually. And likewise, I'm all about trying to get more good quality housing created. And interestingly, actually, the last podcast I did was talking about, one of the things I mentioned is how free or subsidised or public sector land is very different to, let's call it open market land, where very often there's competition, you're bidding against other developers, you've got typically high existing use values. So, it's much more driven by the economics, really, which is sort of unfortunate, but I guess that's just the world we live in. Tell me how what your views on squaring that circle, really.
Well, it was a very cheap project. It's 9 million for all those homes, remediating all that land, stopping the river wall caving in, doing rain gardens and rills, all that suds, which at that time was quite innovative. I think the thing is there was already ambition for that site from there being something called the Ousburn Trust in the valley, and they'd like really built up this ambition. And one of the planners in the council who did the brief for the developer competition did watercolour sections through the valley, which was a very V-shaped valley.
Yeah.
And we just thought, oh, that's really beautiful, this idea that you'd get drawings like that in a developer competition, So I think nothing ever comes from nowhere, There is like a need to create the right compost for development and the right ambition. I think we won the 2016 Top Supreme Housing Design Award in the country that year for the mailings. I always thought, well, it did help a little bit that David Birkbeck, who runs Housing Design Awards,
Yeah, I know David.
Grew up there.
Oh, did he?
Had a big soft spot for it, and was on the film talking about riding shunters when he was a kid down the slopes. But I think also it was daring in that the local authority gave it permission, even though these window-to-window distances were extremely small, pinch points, 5 metres.
Really? So interesting. So one of the things I used to talk a lot about is things like the Essex Design Guide. Jesus, the amount of development that has killed for many years when it was just pure planning by numbers. If you're not, if you're 20.9 metres, instant dismissal. I mean, absolutely ridiculous. So I guess things that aren't quite so crazy now. But it's interesting. So these schemes, you've talked about stuff where you've got the local authority on board, and they are, they're invested and incentivised to help make stuff happen. Most of the stuff I have been involved in, and lots of the sort of smaller developers that I'm really trying to help support and encourage and rebuild, we're usually in situations whereby for many years it's actually felt like the planners are trying to stop you doing stuff. When it's a speculative scheme, we're trying to find sites. It might be a little gap somewhere, or it might be assembling some gardens, or who knows what it might be. And it is just much more driven by trying to meet landowners' expectations, trying to get deals to stack up.
Totally. I think that there is we've always been a small studio culture, and I thought that everything was possible. But when we won a MIPIM Design Award. Do you know in Cannes this kind of property festival thing?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And so we got invited to a few things. I went down there, and that's when I started realising what tiny, tiny, tiny little world we lived in our tiny bubble. And there's very little kind of sort of real respect for what we do in the wider property sector. And, you know, as long as you didn't say you were an architect, you could listen in on conversations which were just eye-watering in their, you know, been so different. Just all of the priorities been so different. So I'm just saying this because local authorities sometimes are aware that they're talked about in very disrespectful terms as being just like, you just have to kind of manipulate the system to get the land or to get the planning. And I think that there needs to be more podcasts like this, because I've listened to most of your podcasts, and it's just that frankness that comes through when you're chatting off record that you'd often hear only if you were part of, you know, a planning consultancy trying to get through on something, or in a deep, dark, you know, bar in Cannes.
Well, it's exactly the reason for doing it, really, because, you know, absolutely good architects and good developers, and there are lots of them, and planners and the planning local authorities committee. Everyone, we really need to do working on this stuff together to make good stuff happen. And whilst there's this whole, you know, them and us type feeling, and it's like, you know, the other side of the fence, there shouldn't be a fence, you know, and not all developers are arseholes, and not all planners are trying to stop stuff happening. So the more everyone really gets it, how it really works, and understands where everyone else is coming from and starts working together, the better.
And I think the problem is people think you can sprinkle on design through design coding, or, you know, you can send somebody into a local authority to, you know, get them on track or something. I feel like it's a culture we got to build in this country that is really at a very primitive level in lots of places. You know, people don't trust contemporary solutions or design. I was in Guildford last night talking with the council and Guildford Society, and they're quite frustrated. They're not attracting the right developers. But then you've got to build a reputation for being a place that developers are welcome.
So this is really interesting. So what would they call the right developers?
Oh, the developers who want to think beyond product. They want to think about the actual topography and landscape and existing community that's there, and how to kind of, like use every scrap of land, but do it in such a way that it's enriching the place, you know, physically and socially. And I think a lot of, well, God, there's so much to say, isn't there? But there's a lot that sort of the game in town at the moment is to build to rent blocks of certain proportions, and too bad if they don't quite fit the site, you know, and you get lots of wasted bits of land and odd, you know, parking arrangements. So probably ought to say that beginning in January, we started thinking nothing is getting better, but Labour are coming in, and we should make a campaign. And what can the campaign achieve? Its basic mission is to stop house builders building in isolated places. And in order to, you know, get people building on brownfield and greyfield and scraps along railways and, you know, odd pockets, you need to rebuild that kind of relationship between local authorities And local authorities are us, aren't they? We give planning, you know, it's a public thing, isn't it? To raise land values, that happens through public saying that they want that to happen. But it's a bit of a broken thing. I would agree with Kevin MacLeod, actually, that lots of parts need revitalising. But the one thing we've got to stop doing is building, you know, house builder estates 3 roundabouts from the nearest pint of milk, because that is like ecological, you know, suicide. It's really bad for our mental health, and it's really bad for local authorities, you know, survival. They're really up against it. How can they get old people to hospital and kids to school if they're so isolated?
Yeah, I agree. Although interestingly,
We call it profitable neighbourhoods, because Ash Sakula are all into neighbourhoods, and we feel it has to be profitable for the investors, has to be profitable for the people living there, and it has to be profitable for the local authorities. And so we see it as a triple lock profitability. Sorry.
no, I like it. Which again, I've seen what you've done with that, and I really like it. I mean, like your little document for that and the website and stuff. It's fantastic. It looks really, really good. What I was going to say, and this is unfortunately the issue that doesn't get talked about very much, is viability. And the fact of the matter is, you know, the whilst you've got land that has to be paid for and particularly remediated or cleaned up if it's brownfield land, or there's demolition there or whatever, and even more so when you're in lower value areas, it is really, really hard to make things work. So I'm absolutely not pro the type of housing that you've talked about, but there are, you know, certain places where greenfield standard-ish housing is the only thing that's sort of financially viable. Certainly, if you're going to provide high percentages of affordable housing as well, which of course we need. So,
I don't agree with that. I don't accept that as a premise.
You don't agree that that's the case, or you don't agree that it's possible to do it, or what?
No, I don't agree it's the case that that's the only way to make the viability work. I think that if you buy cheap land because it's disconnected, what you're doing is you're kicking the viability down the road, and somebody else has to pick it up. It's not actually ethical to build in disconnected places.
I agree, but let's just say, so for example, you know, there are, again, absolutely, in an ideal world, you would be regenerating brownfield land. Let's just say lots of places. Let's say in the Midlands and the North, where historically there was lots of industry, doesn't exist anymore. So there are lots and lots of vacant brownfield sites in or close to the town centre. So absolutely sustainable in terms of neighbourhoods and amenities and exactly where housing should be, not on the edge or outside. But come back to the viability point, and I'm old fashioned, so I talk in terms of square feet, but the principle is the same. Where, you know, sales values are in, you know, even when you've built stuff and sold it, you might get 250 quid a square foot for it, but it costs 250 quid a square foot or more to actually develop the site. So there's no profit and there's no land value. So that is really the issue. Unless the land is like subsidised or somehow other incentivised, how are you going to make that happen? That's why, you know, you can't expect private speculative developers to do stuff for nothing, because at the end of the day, it's a risky business and you've got to make a profit.
Yeah, but if we go down, I find that with these arguments, you can either have a positive spiral, or you can have a kind of this is the way it is negative spiral. And there is nothing to stop us going lower and lower in that. And we can't afford a dystopian landscape. We can't afford not to with the fact that people are anyway going to be struggling for any kind of job in the future with the AI and the global economy, we've got to make it easier for this country to succeed. So one of the things one could start saying is, like, there aren't enough small builders, like I think you've said a lot, and smaller investors let into this. We did something called collective custom build back in 2015 with Taylor Wimpey. We were looking at like their design guides, their little privacy strips out the front of, you know, their standard housing. And we said, right, what if you do something more like Lilac in Leeds, which is one of the few places where this idea of collective co-housing has actually happened. So more people doing it, more from all sorts of walks of life, would be great, because I think that there's a lot of intelligence in this country, and they'll find little crevices, they'll find ways of making the best use of the fabric that we've got and building onto it and densifying. And we did the SBD for Lewisham, looking at small sites. There's a ton of land there, you know, but we need to get the policy to support people building on it. And that's a kind of something which, even within councils, there's a lot of battle on that. But if we get more small builders, more designers, more people who want to co-invest together, and we take it down to that kind of like micro level, strangely, if all of that activity happens simultaneously, you're going to find that it's not 10% of the housing market. It's going to be going up to more like, or possibly up to 60% or something in the future, like they've got in Austria, where people build their own homes. So yeah. I feel like the government should be supporting that more. I know Richard Bacon, Norwich, did bring in this thing that all local authorities have to have a list of people who wish to build their own home. But also we need that, maybe some property developers should just go off and do some other, you know, get into another field, because people who can only be bothered to look at spreadsheets, they don't really deserve to be influencing our landscapes and our new generations of people who are growing up in well, Yolanda Barnes, who's quite well known from Savills, but also now as a professor at UCL, she says, the big problem is TMT, too much tarmac. We've got to stop thinking that everything is 3 or 4 cars clustered around a little box, and that's the only way people can live. We've got to make it different. We've got to get away from... The cars are going to get cheaper. They're going to get massively cheaper. So this is an exponential problem with electric cars. We could just, following what you're saying, if we just go for cheap, we're just going to end up with a cheap kind of culture.
I'm not saying that. I'm all about more small developers. In general, more small businesses, more small everything. Yeah, like globalization and massive business and corporations are the thing that's killing this world, in my opinion.
It's extractive, isn't it?
Yeah. So I was just really making the point that about the fact that viability is an issue. Yeah, and let's just make it as simple as possible. The reason a lot people are going to get bored with this, because I bang on about this a lot. I always come back to this statistic about SME house builders, smaller house builders. Yeah, 1988, based on the surveys, was the peak, and then it's massively declined since then, right? And so as a result, and I'll tell you what happened. So interestingly, I was 21, 1988. I built my first new build house, and I started realising how important land and planning was, and spent the rest of my career trying to make myself a bit of an expert in that. Yeah, but as land and planning, the whole planning in particular, got more and more complex. You were there for it at the same time. all that happened is all of the old builders and smaller developers that were generally just very good builders, and a lot of them built some really good stuff. The planning got too costly and expensive, so they gave up, went bust, or got taken over by the bigger developers because the issue was the planning difficulties was the same for them. And the only way they could get hold of land to keep their pipeline and keep developing was to buy the little developers to get hold of their land, which is why we've got, I don't know, 50%, whatever the number is, of the homes in this country being built by just the big developers. And that's continuing. I mean, even the last couple of months, you've got Barratt's and Redrow actually joining up, right? So I'm 100, and that's why we get the type of development we get. What we really need, in my opinion, and what I really want to help happen is lots and lots of smaller developers again that want to do good stuff, and on little sites here and there and town centres and things like that. But it can't be ignored by planners and policymakers that it's a risky business. They need to make a profit, and planning is massively, massively complex. So as a result,
I think planning is set to become less complex. I do think that there's going to be more. The issue is the skill set, really, for building, and we've got to make like insulation free in this country. We've got to insulate what we've got.
Yeah.
At the moment, it's super expensive, isn't it, just to buy a foam board, let alone a kind of wood chip board or something. So it's something that I think government can nudge and should do. So Homes England, they've got a land hub. There's some things that they haven't put on the land hub yet that I know about, that they're interested in. The thing that we're doing with profitable neighbourhoods is we're trying to double the density of the homes on each plot of land. And the way that we're doing that is we're creating a house on top of a house. So you get 2 front doors in a house form. You've got no common parts, no lifts, none of that shared maintenance, which service charges show can be, very wayward, very unpredictable. So if we can get the stars aligned where we really waste not, want not, we get all of the property that we've got already fit for purpose. We let people build on, make their courtyard houses, build up little towers. We loosen the planning regulations, and we don't add design codes. Design codes is just, I know I should love it because it's about design.
No, I don't think you should. I was going to ask you about that.
I don't feel like
I can't imagine any architect loves it, do they?
I think it's a stream of work, but the problem is that it's that big thing about the future is that it's only going to be good if we think really holistically about the challenge, but also very, very locally about what's appropriate for each little patch. And depending on how the streams of money come together, talking about viability again, something could happen where 200 families get together and take over something and make a catalyst for regeneration. I know people don't talk about regeneration so much, but it's the confidence, isn't it, in the fact you can make money. And one thing you're not gonna, there's going to possibly be a horrible capital flight from these isolated house builder estates, because I think once people kind of wake up and think, this isn't fun, how many more cars can we take on this roundabout? I'm spending most of my time, in this limbo. I think it's possible that it will be like the out-of-town shopping centres, those tertiary ones that are basically old money. So, I'm not sure, in coming way, way back to what you were saying, that buying cheap land is the way to do it. I think what we need to do is we need to think, right, so you're a build-to-rent operator or investor. Maybe you buy 50 little plots within this square mile, and you think really creatively about how to make the most of all of those things. And luckily in this country, we've got incredible amount of creative energy. So we just have to define things differently, I feel. And then that operator with their patient capital, because they're built to rent, will be able to really make quite a bit of money over time. And people will be making that town, more characterful and richer and more prosperous. That's where the growth should be, growing inwards, not outwards.
I do agree with that. I mean, I know you and I agree, or to rather disagree, or we're not fully agreed on build to rent. We've discussed that before. I think for me that's just going more. It's again the direction. It's more of like, well, now people can't even afford to own homes; they've got to rent them from BlackRock. So I think there's better ways of doing it. Now, whether it's some sort of...
Not BlackRock. It needs to be a local, like the old building societies. It needs to be a locally based investor.
Yeah. I'd be really interested to... I've been thinking about it for a long time, actually. There must be some model that will work for that actually allows local people or, people rather than big corporations to own or invest or... Basically,
like the B corporations or those ESCOs, those energy setups.
That type of thing. I'm not quite sure what the model is. Maybe there's someone else out there already doing it. I don't know. I'd love to hear if there is. Yeah, well, we could talk about that. I mean, that's one of the things I know you're involved in that I really, really like. Do you want to tell us about that? Maybe we'll finish off with the Phoenix project.
I was just tapping the picture just now because this is... our latest Housing Design Award that we got this year for at project level for 44 homes in...
I want to show the camera. Hopefully this is a bit frustrating for people that are listening rather than watching, but some of these things you've referred to, we're trying to see if we can get them inserted into onto the YouTube. If you're listening... you should probably go and check us out on YouTube as well, Inside Property Development, as you know, on the YouTube channel, where you can see some of the pictures of the things that we're talking about. So this is an excellent scheme. I love it. So tell us about that.
Okay, it's our passion. It's our, at the moment, because it encapsulates a lot of what we've been trying to campaign for over our career, which is... to create micro neighbourhoods inside larger neighbourhoods inside towns. And this is an industrial estate in Lewes, which is this town in the gap in the Downs just north of Brighton, where there's a river running through that floods. And this industrial estate flooded really badly in 2000. But it's still going to be... the space that 700 homes are going to be built because there's a really clever idea about how to do the flood defences. And the developers, Human Nature, Joanna Yarrow and Jonathan Smales, Joanne Yarrow, are a couple who come from Lewes. And so they're the developers that you... favour, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's sort of embedded.
Well, I like them. I mean, I love what they're doing and what they're trying to do. It's right up my street. Yeah.
And they came from with perfect eco credentials, having worked for Greenpeace and had a previous company called Beyond Green. And so they're aiming to create something which is car light or car free. Our bit is definitely car-free. It's called Jacobs Square, and it's named after Jane Jacobs, who was the famous urbanist writing in the 60s in New York about how important the street was as a place of interaction and neighbourhood building. So we've got a triangular site, and you can imagine if you're taking square boxes around a triangle, there's certain moments where it breaks, and there's certain moments where things can't be square, but generally the typologies are very sensible. It's repetitive, but certain moments, suddenly you get a trapezoidal house, and we call it the big house, or at the corners, you get these ones which, twist through 90 degrees and play a different game. So all of it is built with hempcrete and local timber, and is using lime render on the inside and the outside. So you've got this wall which is like 500 mil thick, but no plastic inside, no complexity. Everything just like is permeable, air permeable, so that if the walls on the outside get drenched, they dry out slowly. If it's very kind of humid, boiling kettles and washing inside, that goes into the wall and then dries out slowly. So the wall is this generous thing which allows a natural changes in temperature and humidity to take place. And I just love it. I just love this simpler way of building buildings. And I think it's a sort of funny that this new technology, if you like, was invented in France not so long ago, like 20 years ago or something, because they were renovating very old timber frame properties. Most of Paris is timber framed, but it was rotting. As they were doing it, they were making things worse. So they looked into how to create an old-fashioned cob system, if you like, which would allow this to happen. So anyway, that's a whole other story, but it's great for fire, great for sound, great for insulation, great for diurnal heat change. You know, you stay cool in the summer. And we're looking forward to building this.
Yeah, well, again, it could, should, hopefully will become a bit of an exemplar in terms of how to do things. Obviously I'm not involved in it. I've got a similar site actually that I'm going to talk to you about where I want to do something similar. But I don't even need to know the details of that site and that deal to know that, as always, the issue is going to be viability. So, the little I know about it and how you've described it, that's not going to be cheap to build. And this is
we're going to have to get a really good deal on the windows. They're all identical.
Yeah.
But they go up and down a bit. You have to think, where can you create the richness, which doesn't cost so much? So around the suds, say, you can be very inventive. If you're doing own door housing, then a floor-to-floor height could change from one to another with no problem. It's all timber frame. And that just gives some richness to the facades where, one house is slightly wider, and the windows are not aligned in perspective when you look along. It's like a very subtle, but there's a higgledy-piggledy-ness to it, which creates a feeling of rightness to the space. And I hope that we'll find ways to make it viable, because I know it is going to be difficult. But one of the things is we're not using brick, and there's some stiffness to brick which creates complexity. We're trying to make it simple. And
yeah, well, it's great. It's so interesting. I obviously I know, having been at the coalface for so long, struggling to get deals to stack up, struggling to buy land, I know how really how hard it is, and it is hard, and I want other people to understand how hard it is. Then hopefully we can all start working together a bit more sensibly.
Bringing people close together, so you cut down on the spaces between, and you make them shared. You're making more use of the land, so we are driving in affordability. Yeah,
well, that is massively important. As I say, one of my bugbears for many, many years has been things like the Essex Design Guide. 1976, I think, for the type of estates that you're actually just talking about, which are terrible. Big volume housing estates out in the fields of Essex, and then that ended up getting applied everywhere. Including central London. Where the whole context is totally different. Massive 21-metre overlooking distances, and
it was all based on the picturesque, wasn't it?
It was just crazy. And so, absolutely, that's why I really love excellent creative architects like yourself that are, really the name of the game is how do you you know, I don't know. Well, actually, from a financial point of view, unfortunately, the name of the game does end up being how do you get as much on the site as possible, yeah, but in a way that is still looks great, feels great, it gives people brilliant living conditions, outside space, and all the rest of it. And unfortunately, it does mean higher densities.
Well, we like density. What I would say is like make good relationships with architects that you enjoy talking to, and trust them to help you find land. I mean, it's a bit frustrating sometimes when you're an architect and you're given a capacity study to do, and you think, why did they choose this place? You know, they could have got that one over there, and we could have done, you know.
Well,
so I think like we like to be right at the top of the process, because it's just there you can deliver the best value to your clients.
Yeah, I think to answer that final question is, it's like from a developer's point of view, looking for sites. Unfortunately, yeah, there's not enough choice. You don't get the choice of, well, I mean, 95% of most people things they look at, deals they just don't stack up. You just can't make them financially viable for all sorts of reasons. That is a fact. So it's not.
So
like
you've thrown that as a challenge. Give me some of these sites.
I've got at least 3 of mine in mind that I had you in mind for anyway.
Because I think you've got quite a kind of wide a peripheral vision, and if you can't make them stack up, I agree. But it's worth the candle, you know. It's worth.
Well, look, that's
chatting.
what I like to say. To be honest, if it's possible to make it stack up, I can make it stack up. So and I'd love to try to make some stack up with you. So.
Great. Well, let's go off into the sunset and make it happen.
Very good. Okay. Well, that seems like a good place to end it, and I'll look forward to trying to get some
more adventures.
Get some stuff off the ground. Brilliant. Lovely. Okay. Right. Well, that's it. Hopefully you liked that one. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I always forget to say that, and tell your friends to come and watch and listen, and then hopefully between us all we can get the SME house building industry rebuilt with good developers and get much more good quality housing created. Thanks for tuning in to Inside Property Development. Please remember to like and subscribe. Do join us every week where we'll be speaking to house builders, developers, experts, planners, and everyone involved in trying to get more much needed housing created the right way. We'll learn together how we can collaborate rather than fight, and by working together we can all help create better places, spaces and homes, and a much more beautiful world.